teacher communicates with students to support learning during instruction. Communication is one of the 5 dimensions in the instruction domain. This dimension focuses on how the teacher clearly and accurately communicates with students to support persistence, deeper learning, and effective effort during instruction. What does the research say about communication? First, goal setting is an act of communicating. Since students focus on what has been set forth as an objective, communicating those objectives becomes central to success. Also, there are 2 trends that are apparent in the research. One is movement from a focus on questions as isolated events to a focus on questions embedded within larger spatial and temporal contexts, including contexts created by the ongoing classroom discourse. Another trend apparent in the research is movement from a focus on teacher-generated questions to a focus on student-generated questions. This trend is apparent in the research on questioning routines embedded in cooperative or collaborative learning environments. The considerable volume of research on questioning has shed light on a number of issues regarding questions as a tool for learning. So what is it that we do know about this? It is known that the incidence of higher order and authentic questions is low relative to lower order and known answer questions. It is known that waiting for students to respond to questions leads to enhanced quality of responses and improved student achievement. It is known that teachers can be taught to ask certain types of questions and that students can be taught how to answer questions based on their relationship to text. It is also known that promoting student-generated questions has positive effects on learning. There are 10 references to communication in the Texas Teacher Standards. Some of these include the following. The teachers are expected to communicate clearly and accurately and engage students in a manner that encourages students' persistence and best efforts. They also set individual and group learning goals for students by using preliminary data and communicate these goals with students and families. Teachers also identify gaps in students' knowledge of subject matter and communicate with their leaders and colleagues to ensure that these gaps are adequately addressed. Teachers also effectively communicate goals, expectations, and objectives to help all students reach high levels of achievement. These are just some of the instances where communication is embedded and threaded in the Texas Teacher Standards. We know that the Texas Teacher Standards were used as the basis to develop the T-Test rubric. Let's now look at the communication dimension and focus on the proficient, accomplished, and distinguished performance levels by looking at the descriptors to clarify what they mean. The first continuum of descriptors includes communication and how teachers establish practices that encourage and teach students to safely communicate information about the lesson's objective using a variety of tools and technology, including other media platforms which support their learning style. There should be ongoing two-way communication between the teacher and students and peer-to-peer. The second continuum of descriptors address how teachers consistently assess students' behaviors and know when students are confused. These cues are used during the lesson to redirect instruction, highlight specific misconceptions, and refocus the lesson through clarifications, questions to redirect learning, asking students to explore new information that leads to new connections. The third set of descriptors tells us that explanations are critical to the learning process and are presented through verbal and written communication with students. Given that learners process information in different manners, modalities, learning groups, etc., effective teachers review the content and process standards that will be taught and determine which verbal and written explanations will best communicate learning for students. For the fourth continuum of descriptors, effective teachers develop the skill to design and incorporate questions that engage students in higher level instructional processes. Students are expected to solve problems and develop meaning for themselves by synthesizing, generalizing, explaining, hypothesizing, and drawing conclusions or interpretations. They have a strong depth of knowledge to understand concepts and central ideas of the discipline and use this knowledge to understand arguments, solve problems, construct meaning, and connect learning beyond the classroom to real-world scenarios. These types of questions are used to generate considerable discussion and peer interactions which authentically engage students in developing a shared understanding of what is being presented. The last continuum addresses the use of probing questions. Questions and probes are used to clarify, elaborate, and extend learning, allowing students to make connections with what they already know and to extend and connect new concepts and skills. As a result, this strategy of using probing questions, when authentically connected, will also motivate students, pique curiosity, and inspire students to persistently challenge themselves. In the accomplished and distinguished levels, the skills are tied together in purposeful ways. Teacher strategies are used to move students towards student-centered instruction, where they assume responsibility for developing and applying probing questions to challenge and extend their own learning and expectations for products and outcomes. Taking this a step further, let's now look at the descriptors and identify through the clarification what these practices might look and sound like in a classroom. Descriptor 1 tells us that the teacher establishes classroom practices that provide opportunities for most students to communicate effectively with the teacher and their peers. Take a minute to read through this clarification. The key point embedded here is that a safe learning environment must be established in order for students to share and discuss ideas and be able to take risks. The second descriptor reads, recognizes possible student misunderstandings, and responds with an array of teaching techniques to clarify concepts. Take a minute to read through this clarification. Moving on, the third descriptor reads, provides explanations that are clear, and uses verbal and written communication that is clear and correct. Take a minute to read through this clarification. Reads, ask questions that focus on the objective of the lesson and provoke thought and discussions, and descriptor 5 addresses asking probing questions. Take a minute to read through the clarification. The use of wait time does appear in the communication dimension of the T-test rubric in the accomplished performance level. What is implied in this performance level is that teachers are purposeful about the use of wait time and allow students the time to think and process before answering questions, usually in some structured way. Let's now look at wait time and how it occurs before calling on students, after calling on students, and after the student answers. The first wait time is before calling on a student. This gives the teacher time to count those students who have been answering questions and those who have not. It also gives the teacher time to assess which students might answer the question correctly. The second wait time is after calling on the student. This gives the student time to frame an answer and gives the teacher time to think of what a comprehensive answer could be. The next wait time 2, happens after the student answers the question. This wait time gives the student time to elaborate on or complete an answer, gives the teacher time to think about whether the answer was correct, incorrect, partially correct, or evasive, and it also provides time for the teacher to frame a response. The response might be a follow-up question or providing student actual feedback regarding the question and the response that was provided. Engage students in a manner that encourages students' persistence and best efforts. Teachers identify gaps in students' knowledge of subject matter and communicate with their leaders and colleagues to ensure that these gaps are adequately addressed across grade levels and subject areas. Teachers ensure that the learning environment features a high degree of student engagement by facilitating discussion and student-centered activities as well as leading direct instruction. Teachers promote complex, higher-order thinking, leading class discussions and activities that provide opportunities for deeper learning. Teachers also ensure that instruction includes opportunities for students to generate questions that lead to further inquiry and promote complex, higher-order thinking, problem-solving, and real-world application. Let's now look at some additional connections to T-tests in practice and the research. Teachers understand, actively anticipate, and adapt instruction to address common misunderstandings and preconceptions. Teachers use and adapt resources, technologies, and standards-aligned instructional materials to promote student success in meeting learning goals. Teachers also establish, implement, and communicate consistent routines for effective classroom management, including clear expectations for student behavior. Teachers also communicate regularly, clearly, and appropriately with parents and families about student progress, providing detailed and constructive feedback and partnering with families in furthering their students' academic achievement goals. Last, teachers communicate consistently, clearly, and respectfully with all members of the campus community, including students, parents, and families, colleagues, administrators, and staff. How are these practices evident with teachers in your organization? As T-test appraisers, what are some questions to help guide you and your thinking around this dimension? First, how is two-way communication evident in instruction through listening, speaking, reading, and writing? How are lessons structured in ways that promote student-led learning that is challenging, meaningful, and deeply engage students in discussion? How are explanations presented in a clear and logical sequenced manner to facilitate mastery of learning and a clear understanding of lesson goals and outcomes? How are higher order questions consistently used during instruction? How is instruction orchestrated to balance questioning techniques, wait time, and the integration of resources that move toward student-centered actions? And last, how are technology and other media tools used to process instruction and communicate students' understanding of the content? As appraisers, how do these questions help guide and frame your thinking as you conduct T-test observations and evaluations? Next, let's look at some conferencing sample questions for both pre-conferences and post-conferences. Read through these as they appear on the screen. For two-way communication between the teacher and students and peer-to-peer throughout instruction. Effective teachers ensure that listening, speaking, reading, and writing are used to communicate and support language development. Effective teachers incorporate technology and visual tools to communicate what is learned as tied to the learning outcomes. Effective teachers understand when students are confused and address misconceptions with targeted techniques and instruction. And effective teachers include higher-level questions and probes, wait time, and follow-up questions that allow for thinking, discussion, and connections. As we think about students being college and career ready, communication is one of the key skills that is expected in the workforce. How then do we ensure that we're building the knowledge and skills necessary to prepare students for post-secondary outcomes? We're going to ask you now to think about the content that was presented in this module, and as instructional leaders, what are your next steps to grow and develop in this area? We want to thank you for participating in this module and look forward to you joining us with the next one.